All right. Hello. Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm honestly so excited to moderate this panel, not just because we're continuing our line of policy discussions, but also because I get to share the stage with 4 amazing women in this space. It's an all-girls panel on crypto, and I don't think you see that very often, and I just had to wear pink to celebrate this. But I'll just let each one of them introduce themselves, starting with Emma, and then we'll take it from here.
Hi, I am Emma Joyce. I head up EMEA and I'm the CRO for the Global Blockchain Business Council, and it's a delight to be here with you all. We definitely don't ever get together enough, and thank you, Avalanche, for having me here today.
I'm Sarah Milby. I'm currently interim CEO at Blockchain Association and also their head of policy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marina, and I'm a co-founder of the European Crypto Initiative. I'm leading this association that is Brussels-based, and we work in the EU.
Hi everyone, I'm Laura Navaratnam. I'm the UK policy lead for the Crypto Council for Innovation, and great to be here, thank you.
And my name is Sylvia Sanchez. I am project manager at Avalanche and also the voice behind the Owl Explains podcast, which is our initiative by the legal team to help while policymakers and also curious minds understand blockchain and Web3 regulation. So I think that it's no secret, and we also saw it with Wei Ming's panel, with Lee's panel, that there's a lot of stuff going on this year when it comes to policy. But I'm just going to start off asking, what are your trade association's general priorities for policy this year? And then we'll get into some more specific things. So just at a glance, and feel free to talk after one another. It's not like one question for one specific person, but what's top of mind for you right now?
I'm happy to kick off.
Okay.
So I think actually Diego and Stu on the last panel covered a lot of this really nicely. For me, with a UK hat on in particular, it is getting that balance between consumer protection and market integrity with genuine understanding of the technology. I think there are some places where regulators are getting it right. I think there are other places where there's still some work to be done. I noticed one of the panelists talked about tech neutrality. I would actually take that a step further and talk about being tech agnostic, because we are in a place where there has to be recognition of the technology, and not just from a negative perspective, but from the benefits as well. But I think the role of policymakers is to remain agnostic to the type of technology that is being used, but understand that that can bring about the next iteration of products, of services, of technological innovation.
Maybe I can go next. So for the European Union, in a way, the most important thing is MiCA. We're going to talk about it later more, and looking into how, how it is affecting the ecosystem. Now we're seeing some results. We're seeing some licenses being granted, but at the same time, also a big problem with smaller crypto as a service providers that cannot follow up with all the compliance they have to do this year. But at the same time, there's so much happening in the EU. Basically, our goal is just to try to follow up with everything. We heard so many new things coming up. For example, you might have heard about a new guidance coming from the European Data Protection Board on how to use GDPR in blockchain, which is pretty severe. Basically, the ultima ratio, in a way, what they say is if it's not compliant with GDPR, it should be somehow deleted. I'm talking about the blockchain, not about the application. Then the other things that are happening are more related to the Savings and Investment Union. We will have some very interesting developments this year, thinking about and looking into what happened with the DLT pilot regime, and then following up and ideally coming up with a new framework for tokenized assets, mostly financial instruments, and that would be something that I think will really be the priority for this year for the EU.
Blockchain Association focuses on what's going on in the U.S. federal policy. And so for us, I would say it's coming into a new transition with President Trump has been a big priority in terms of how we are now approaching digital assets across the government. There's still an education gap to fill, but what we're really seeing right now is a lot on the legislative side. So there are quite a few bills moving through Congress. I would say our three priorities are market structure, which is a term that we use to describe setting up a framework for the trading and custody of digital assets. The second would be stablecoins. So we saw a lot of progress this week on a bill moving through the U.S. Senate. Well, not fully, but it's at least taking a step in the right direction. And then the last is tax. This year is a reconciliation year in the U.S. Congress, which means that it's easier to pass a bill that touches the budget, and that includes tax policy. So that is somewhere that we are also spending a lot of time.
We are global, and we have members all across the globe and teams in the UK, in the US. We've got new teams now out in APAC, so based in Korea, and in Europe. And so our main priority is education, absolutely. So education for policymakers, for regulators, and for society at large, because I don't think we'll ever see mass adoption until we've got that education really sewn up, and it's definitely still a work in progress. But in each different jurisdiction, we have slightly different focus. In the UK, we're responding to a lot of the consultations. We're very focused on engaging with the different regulators and with the policymakers. We've got a large team in the US and quite a few of them in Washington, so we're very focused on the change of administration there and what that means for new legislation coming in. And then in Europe, we have actually just joined or set up a new society called the Digital Economic Society. So that is with some other associations, CCI being one of those, and we are focused on educating MEPs. And so that's what we will be doing for this year.
Amazing, thank you all. I think that's a great overview to just help settle the base for that. But I'd like to know, how are your members feeling about the current policy momentum? Are they cautious, overwhelmed, hopeful, or just a combination of that? Like, what have you seen from their reactions regarding what's happening?
Shall I take that first?
Yeah, of course.
It's fairly positive, but there's definitely a mix. And I think because we have our membership spread throughout the globe, you're seeing slightly different reactions. At the end of, I think there is a general optimism that we're going to be seeing regulatory clarity as the year progresses, and that we are definitely, getting closer to regulation in most jurisdictions. Whether that regulation will ever be harmonized across the globe is another question, and is a question for a lot of our members, because a lot of our members have, offices in all different jurisdictions. So I think it is fairly optimistic, but also there is definitely a cautious note there as well, to sort of not be swept up in everything, and to, I think, ensure that everything is done properly. We must have innovation, but we must have sensible regulation as well. So I guess it's like managing that balance.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, in the UK, having had a long period of not much happening, now all of it's happening at breakneck speed. So I think our members are feeling definitely positive to see that momentum is building, but there is always a concern when you are creating policy at this kind of pace that is genuinely complex, making sure that we as a trade association are providing that input in a timely manner, in the right places into policymakers, to make sure they stay on track. You slightly feel like you're running but can't quite see the end goal yet, and just sort of hoping for the best. But I think, yeah, definitely broadly positive vibes, I think.
Yeah, I would just add that I feel like the U.S. is in a really exciting moment right now, with a lot of frameworks developing, moving forward, and something that I feel like comes out of the woodwork as soon as the tide has changed. I feel like with the Trump administration, is all of a sudden the industry is being asked like what it wants and what works. And I feel like a lot of the last 4 years under the Biden administration, there was a lot of defensive action that the industry had, and so now it's, I think, on the front foot rather than the back foot, and that's put the industry in a unique place to try to forge consensus around different positions. And as a trade association, that's something that we've been doing a lot of work on, is trying to find places in the industry where there is harmony and where we can advance the policy dialogue, because it's a complex issue. Like, for instance, decentralization, right? Like, it means something different to everyone, but if we're trying to legislate and make a definition or a framework that uses the concept of decentralization, we have to start to articulate as an industry what that means. And so that's something that, for instance, we've been spending a lot of time on.
For the EU, I think we're a little bit more, I would say, realistic rather than optimistic. We were optimistic 5 years ago when we started MiCA, and now we're, kind of in this process where we do see I think most of the members being overwhelmed with MiCA, DORA, there's like Deck 8, there's so many things happening, and they're really focusing on getting the licenses, the one that haven't done that yet. But at the same time, where new things coming up that might be, linked to also the infrastructure. So the ones that are not crypto as a service providers might look into something like a Cyber Resilience Act, might be looking into the GDPR, might be looking into things that, not being a CASP is not helping you. You still need to look into some of the tech regulations that are coming up. So a little overwhelmed.
Okay, a little overwhelmed, that makes sense. And now we're just going to get into more specific regions and regulations, and you just touched on MiCA, but building on that, Marina, what's working well so far, but also like what are some challenges that could happen? Because we know that this is a long process, both from when it starts being implemented and then just this build-out phase. But I'd like to know from the European Crypto Initiative perspective, what could we see being like a difficult area ahead to navigate, like with all your members making sure that, okay, they're complying, that MiCA is finally happening? Like, how do you predict on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what we have seen mostly is that not all the national competent authorities, which are in a way supervising MiCA, are not ready yet. Like, for example, Portugal still doesn't have a law, and we don't know officially who is the national competent authority in Portugal. So this is really bringing a lot of problems to some of the crypto as a service providers that really wanted to, approach those national competent authorities. At the same time, I think that a lot of things that were related to MiCA were in a way, this is where crypto as a service providers mostly put their attention, but at the same time we see that the national competent authorities are also trying to get those crypto as a service providers being compliant with DORA as well. So they're linking both of the licenses, and they're thinking, okay, you will get the MiCA license when you're compliant with DORA as well, or at least we need to know what's your priorities and what your in a way timeline is for DORA. So that's why maybe it's taking longer than predicted for some of the crypto as a service providers. And while we're thinking about this, implementation of MiCA, there's still rumors in the Parliament, within the European Central Bank, of reopening MiCA. And we think that at least it's clear from the European Commission that they are not interested in reopening MiCA, but mainly the questions were around stablecoins and the financial stability of the EU. So the European Central Bank, in a way, is questioning MiCA's ability to really be enough to create some kind of a financial security in the EU, looking into the potential changes coming from the US. So for now, I think there's not going to be a MiCA 2, MiCA is not being reopened for the moment, but we're still going to, in a way, follow up what's happening in the next months.
Thanks, Marina. This is for Sarah. Let's talk US policy. So we know that there's this new administration. There's a lot of stuff happening. We have proposed legislation like the market structure and stablecoin stuff. So what's your take on the US policy side? I know we're talking about the year's policy priorities, but we're almost at June. But what do you see coming up for the rest of this year?
Yeah, I mean, there's interesting dual tracking right now in the United States between the regulators and the legislators, which I think puts us in an interesting position as an industry. Not only are we trying to provide feedback on legislative priorities such as the Genius Act and the market structure discussion draft that was released, but we're also working with regulators who are putting out guidance in the meantime. And ultimately, legislation will trump what happens at the guidance level in many ways, but at the same time, it is a really important step to show a change in perspective, I think, from the regulators that's occurring, and the rolling back of some of the regulation by enforcement that we saw. And so for us, we are trying to engage on both fronts because they're both important dialogues that will provide clarity to the industry and hopefully lasting guidance. And so it's just a matter of kind of doing both at the same time and trying to advance, at least hopefully get market structure across the line this Congress. I think that for us is the biggest priority at the moment. And we're seeing a lot of momentum on stablecoins as well. So if we can get those things done, I think we'll be in a really good place in the US.
Thank you. And now let's go back to the UK. So you mentioned that the UK is busy. There's finally some momentum happening, but because we've seen that the FCA has this new discussion paper and also that stablecoin consultation expected at any minute. But what are the key takeaways from the CCI perspective? Is the UK charting its own path? What are your takes on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's probably two aspects here. One is around kind of competitive advantage for the UK, and one is around that technology balance. So as you say, we have got a very aggressive timeline for regulatory development. The FCA put out its roadmap last year. Since then, we've had a discussion paper on market abuse, admissions and disclosures. We've had the crypto asset activities discussion paper from the FCA as well, statutory instrument drafted from Treasury, so that sort of sets the regulatory perimeter. So there is a lot happening very quickly, and there are some areas where I'm really pleased to see that policymakers are looking to the lessons learned from other jurisdictions. So, for example, with MiCA, the Treasury is focusing on stablecoins issued within the UK. There's lots of different options of how to do this. Rather than requiring some level of subsidiarisation within the UK, policymakers have decided rather just to focus on the UK jurisdictionally. Again, I think that's been a particular challenge in the MiCA context. The problem comes then to what actually issuing means, because if you have that definition too broad, it potentially brings in lots of other technology providers, intermediaries within the process, and sort of negates the whole potential benefit that you could from realising that. The other issue here is, as I mentioned earlier, is around balancing the technology. So, and there's two areas I would think about this. So there's one around decentralization. So I'm really pleased that the FCA has mentioned decentralization in its discussion paper. It is just 2 pages. It's not a big mention, but it shows it's starting to think about this and not just kicking the can down the road. And the FCA had a roundtable recently where they talked about decentralization as a spectrum, which is very good, and they have been clear that things that are truly decentralized will be out of scope. But they're not, in the same breath, Treasury has unhelpfully said that the FCA will have this sort of power to judge on a case-by-case basis whether something is actually decentralized. So I think we do need more in terms of what does that look like, how does one judge, and who exactly is going to be the judge? Because in an ex-post situation, is it the case that you would assume that everything is centralized unless you can prove otherwise? So I think we do need to get more into the weeds on those kinds of points. But I think it's good that the FCA and Treasury is recognising that. Another area in this vein is around staking. So qualifying staking will be a regulated activity. I don't have a problem with that in of itself. But again, the devil is in the detail. I think particularly a staking activity that sits alongside custody, I can get myself very comfortable with that. But because of the way staking is drafted very broadly and the territorial scope means actually I think they could be inadvertently bringing in an awful lot of ecosystem participants that aren't intended. So, for example, if I'm operating a validator on a DPoS chain like Solana, I could be doing that anywhere in the world. If a UK individual delegates to my validator, my reading is that I would have to be regulated in the UK, and I don't think that can possibly be the outcome that policymakers are seeking to achieve. The deadline is Friday, so we're trying to do this at pace. But I'm very pleased to see regulators and Treasury engaging on these really important topics. It's just trying to land those messages at the moment.
Very important. And I think you did a really good overview of a lot of things that we're seeing and trying also to prevent when you said that the definitions are too broad and the dangers that it poses, or when you classify all assets just as one big thing. It's not like that. And I think that's why a lot of these initiatives happen. I think that's also why we focus so much on Owl Explains, drilling, okay, not all crypto assets are the same. If the definition is too broad, you're going to have a lot of exceptions, and then it's going to be way more messy than it should be. And then this one is for Emma. You represent the global view, the GBBC, so let's zoom out a bit with you. So just in general, how do you see the international regulatory landscape evolving? And on that, I know you guys are doing a lot of amazing work at the GBBC with taxonomy, getting the definitions right. So what are some of the initiatives that the GBBC is working on with this?
Well, I think as we touched on earlier, globally it's very exciting, and it's very different. I mean, I think Europe has it hard. It's always hard being first with MiCA. I think many of us were very impressed with MiCA, but obviously it's hard being first, and others will improve upon it. We're all, going to ask that question a million times, I'm sure, whether there's going to be a MiCA 2 anytime soon. There's so much going on in the UK. We've already got 3 of us working on UK policy at GBBC. I've actually just taken on another full-time UK policy person. I can't announce them as contracts haven't been signed, but that's just showing how much is happening. You know, in APAC, we already have regulators who are regulating stablecoins, for instance. So, you know, looking at those, you know, for instance, MAD, looking at those jurisdictions, I think, as we all wait with bated breath on the UK stablecoin information hopefully coming soon. And we're also very interested in jurisdictions outside of the G20. So we run a regulators-only forum, which is for regulators just outside the G20, which is monthly, really well attended, where it gives those regulators a chance to, you know, discuss what they're doing amongst other regulators, and also a chance for us to help educate where they need it the most and bring members in. Taxonomy is very important to us. We have had a taxonomy working group running for a number of years, and last year GBBC was one of the co-chairs on the CFTC's taxonomy working group, and so produced the first digital assets taxonomy for the US, which we were really excited about, and you know, has been picked up by many. And I think that is very important, and building that understanding of those terms, and you know, that will be more important, I think, as we get closer to that legislation and how important those determined terms are.
Thanks, Emma. And this one is just in general for the group. And let's talk about what's coming next, not in terms of regulation necessarily, but also with the integration of emerging technologies like AI, quantum computing into blockchain. How are trade associations and regulators preparing for that integration, for that added layer of that?
I can take a quick stab. I mean, I don't know. I think this might be part of the problem. Regulators and legislators, I think, tackle the things that are getting headlines, and I don't know if we're quite at the point right where like AI's integration into blockchain is getting headlines at this point. And so for that reason, I feel like we're still on trying to do the basics around token trading and custody and kind of where the failures of FTX were, to be frank. And so I think that's probably where legislators and regulators are focused now, knowing that things will come down the line, like there's a future path where they will need to legislate and provide clarity on those types of technologies and integrations, but I just don't know if we are there yet.
And I think so for instance, I've just come back from Dubai, which is, you know, as we all know, is the regulators are fairly progressive there. And I would say DFSA in particular do have quite an interest in blockchain and AI. And, you know, they are very, I think, you know, it's really top of their thoughts about, they want this innovation, but they also need, you know, they need to think about the regulation around it. And there are definitely, you know, thoughts going on about AI and blockchain. So I think it is happening, and we know regulators are particularly thinking about it, but I agree, I think it is going to be the topics that get the headlines that dominate.
So the EU, surprise, has regulated AI, but I don't think that they're looking into, let's say, the AI that really influences finance. I think there's discussions around that, but we haven't seen something really concrete coming out of it. And I think I'm mostly, in a way, a little excited or curious how to use AI when it comes to anti-money laundering, transfer of funds regulation. Maybe there are some interesting, you know, applications there. But I don't think it is, or, you know, as it was said before, it is needed to be, in a way, regulated right now. When it comes to quantum, I think that it's really, really early. I'm not an expert, of course, but there's no discussions around that. I think it's mostly important for the layer ones, for the blockchains like Avalanche, to really think about, you know, it from a like technical perspective. But when it comes to regulation, there's discussion, of course, coming from banks and even them thinking about their own infrastructure. But I haven't heard about any type of regulation coming up.
Yeah, I mean, just one extra point from me. I really agree with what Sarah was saying, and I think, you know, nothing focuses minds like a crisis. I think the UK and the US are quite similar here, and I do see regulators thinking about AI at a very early stage, but they are not looking at the the interplay between these different technologies and how they're going to, what those use cases will be in the future. And part of that is, I don't think they've had the burning platform yet to do that. And that's certainly a role that industry can play in starting to bring those use cases to regulators and policymakers, whether it's through things like sandboxes, whether it's through kind of demo days, these kinds of things. There's definitely, back to the education point, you know, the ecosystem is moving, and we can't always be in a position where regulators are reacting to it. Like, if we can get ahead, that's how you genuinely carve out a space for true innovation.
Just one thing I'll add about this nexus too is I feel like crypto in general has not had a ChatGPT moment. And what I mean by that is, like, I think people see how AI influences their everyday, and they're using it and really interacting with the technology every day in a very easy user experience. And I just feel like we haven't quite gotten that use case yet where we really have everyday Americans that are going to their members of Congress. Because I think if a member of Congress thought about banning, like we had the banning of TikTok, or that was a contemplation, right? You heard all these Americans come out and say, like, no, please don't do that. I use it every day. At this point, I feel like there aren't enough members that are hearing from their constituents, like the everyday Americans, or, you know, in other jurisdictions as well, about the impact crypto's had on their life. And I feel like there will be a time when we have that kind of unlocking, but I you know, don't know if we're there yet either.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. And I think it's really interesting, the comparison with AI, because that touches on every sector across society. And from a policy perspective, we seem societally willing to take that kind of overarching view, whereas crypto, we allow it to be rooted in financial services. And that's not, I get it to some extent, but I don't from the other. Like, from a technology perspective, why are we not also taking that broader approach and then deciding in each sector what that looks like? It's very interesting how with AI we do it one way and with crypto we do it another way.
Those are all great points. And I think until it reaches that point where, okay, it touches your daily life and people start buzzing and it's on the headlines. And I think we're in a day and age where a lot of things rely on virality, like until it goes viral and people are talking about it, maybe there's going to be like that push for that. But in the meantime, we'll wait. And I want to conclude with a happy question just very quickly, because I know that there's still a lot of work to do ahead. But just reflecting back, has there been a moment recently where you've realized, okay, I'm happy with this. This is why we do the work, like a small win to celebrate that you have seen, whether at your trade association, at your members. They're like, okay, maybe we weren't there 5 years ago and now we've done this. What's like a small moment to celebrate around that?
I mean, I think this year it's just a year to celebrate, you know, because you see so many lawmakers, you know, talking about regulating this industry really, really seriously, which, you know, just wasn't happening a few years ago. So I'm very positive for the industry this year.
I'd just say the Genius Act vote earlier this week, seeing a bipartisan showing of support was really important, and I think shows a lot of momentum moving forward in this year.
So for the EU, I think it would be tokenization. Like we have seen Mika, and I think most of the participants in a way in the ecosystem are happy with it. But the future, what the future holds in a way, it's for us a better DLT pilot regime that could become a law or could be a part of existing financial regulations. So everyone is talking about tokenization right now. I think there are very serious players coming into the space, and that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, from our side, I mean, CCI has been doing a lot of work with the Proof of Stake Alliance in the UK to educate around staking, and I'm really pleased to see some of the risks and benefits as we have articulated them played back in some of the policy papers. So I think we're making a good win on the education front.
Amazing. Well, that's it for today because our time flew by. But just really quickly, in case you're curious or like, oh, I should start understanding more about blockchain policy, because it's not just about the technology, but also the things that affect all of us, whether you're a developer, a user, I invite you to check out owlexplains.com. We work very closely with the trade associations represented here. We talk directly to policymakers, to Congress people, to people building on blockchain. So I invite you to check it out. And with that, it's time for lunch. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.